Hello, how are you doing today? My name is Lynn and welcome to my channel. I will be making my first advent calendar of the year, and the paper I chose to use is Let It Snow from Graphic 45. This is actually, I think, one of the Christmas collections from last year. I will probably be making another advent calendar using this year's collection, which is Warm Wishes. But in this video, I'll actually cover, I'm making the same style of advent calendar I did a couple years ago. I have a video on just how to make the boxes. It's the one with the separate lid from the bottom. And in this video, I'll cover not just how to make the box, but also how to put together the entire advent calendar. And what I'll do, because it's probably going to be a long video, is I'll timestamp this so you can see how to make this box. So this is the two-part box with the separate lid. I'll show how to make the folio cover, which is basically the same way you would make a mini album cover. And then I'll show how to attach the boxes to your folio. So if you already know how to do some of these components, you can just hover over the timeline and then just skip straight to the section that is most relevant to you. So I'm using black chipboard. This is actually a medium weight, but I feel like it's really nice and strong. So I've got the spine piece here, which measures 11 inches tall by 2 3/4 wide. Then the album covers are going to be 8.5 wide by 11 tall. So pretty easy. Basically, it's the size of a US letter sheet. So 8.5 by 11. Those are your two covers, and then the spine is 2 3/4 by 11. And I've already chosen some of my papers. I might fussy cut that one out. We'll see. In the end, I changed up some things a little bit, but mostly what you see laid out here is what I will be using. I am really grateful that with Graphic 45 papers, you know how some papers have that little hole that's punched out of the top so that they can hang the paper pad? Well, Graphic 45 papers don't have that, so that means that salvage edge or the branding strip, that's a solid piece of cardstock. So I'm using that to my advantage. That way I have enough paper to actually use pattern paper to wrap my covers. And it's fantastic because it's just an extra little ½ inch, but that ½ inch makes a difference because that takes it from being 11 inches or 12 inches to 12.5 inches. And that gives me 3/4 of an inch all the way around. And that's plenty to wrap my chipboard pieces with. So I'll get more into that when we get to starting in on creating our folio. First off, let me show you how to create the boxes. So these boxes are really nice. They have a separate lid. The lid stays on nice and snug, but not too tightly so that it's hard to remove and hard to put back on. And they're really sturdy. They make for pretty nice gift boxes. So if you want to maybe gift a bit of jewelry or charm or something like that, you can do that. So what you'll need is one piece of pattern paper, whatever you want your box lid to be. You want to cut that piece at 6 by 6, and then your other, whatever you want to be the bottom of your box, you want to cut that to 5 3/4 by 5 3/4. So these are square pieces here. I'll show you a couple of different ways to create your box. It's basically an origami fold, but I do use a little bit of glue just to make it even more secure. Though technically being origami, you don't technically need the glue. What we need to do is score some diagonal lines, and our lines are going to get scored from the midway point of one side to the midway point of the other side. So there's a couple of different ways to do this, and just depending on what tools you have available to you. I have this the We Are Memory Keeper All-in-One The Works tool, and it has this handy tool that lets you create tags, envelopes, and whatnot. And there's a kind of an angle, a 45-degree angle that you can butt your papers up to. And that's going to allow you to score on a perfect 45-degree angle. So first what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit of a score mark, a little indentation at the 3-inch mark of my pattern paper. So 3 inches is at the halfway point of 6 inches. When you're doing this on your box bottom, the halfway point is 2 7/8. Then what I want to do is where that score mark is, you could give yourself a pencil tick mark. I just don't want to have to bother with erasing. And I can see the score mark okay. I know it doesn't show up on camera, but I can totally see it. But use whatever method you want, whether it's a pencil mark or a little score mark. But you want to line that wherever your score track is, and I'm using my cutting track. Once you identify, get that lined up, then you can identify where along this particular tool also has a ruler at that angle. So if you have this tool, I'm just lining the tag up with the tag, and where the edge of my paper lands is at 2 5/8. Then you want to rotate 90 degrees. And you just want to butt the end up again at that 2 5/8. Your previous score line should intersect with your scoring track, and that's how you know everything's going to line up perfectly. I feel like it's easier just to look for the edge of this paper rather than lining up the previous score line to the scoring track, because on a busy pattern paper like this one, it can be hard to see. So if you want to even put a little bit of washi tape, right at that 2 5/8 inch mark, you could do that too. And that would be even easier. You just butt up your paper against that washi. So here's another way of doing it if you don't have this tool. So I'm going to go all the way around all 4 sides, and I'll give myself a little tick mark, a little pencil mark at the halfway point. So for this piece, this panel measures 5 3/4 by 5 3/4. So the halfway mark is 2 7/8. So there's our 4 tick marks, and we want to score our line connecting each of those tick marks to the adjacent one. So again, you can use any of your score tracks. I like to use the cutting track on this particular board because it's easy for me to identify that I'm on the same track. You want to line up your 2 tick marks inside along that track. So then you can just score your line that way. If you don't have a scoring tool at all, what you can just use is a straight edge like a ruler. And if you have something squishy like a mouse pad or a stamping pad like this, you could use a bone folder or maybe the blunt end of like a pen or something that you can score with if you don't have a bone folder or scoring tool. And then you can just score along your ruler. So that works as well. If you do have the all-in-one tool like I do, and you line up the 2 tag marks, then the line that you want to look for is the 2 1/2 inch mark. So you just want to butt your edge up at the 2 1/2 inch and score all 4 diagonal lines. So that's the scoring. And I'll share with you the process because you do have to make 24 lids and 24 bottoms. And I would definitely recommend starting early and, taking it in bits so that you save your hands, because some parts of this can be a little bit tough on your hands. And if you have joint issues And even if you don't have joint issues, you want to avoid joint issues. So, take good care of yourself. And if you do plan on making multiples of these, definitely start early. What I like to do is cut down all of my squares first. All of the lids, all of the bottoms, to get them all cut. Then I do all of the scoring for all of them, because those two parts, they're not too much wear and tear on your hands. These next couple of steps are, though. So the next couple of steps that I'll show, I actually like to do in batches, maybe 4 to 6 boxes at a time, and then I'll give myself a little break, stretch my fingers a little bit, and then come back to it in a little bit. So what you want to do is, along those 4 score lines, the diagonal score lines, go ahead and fold each of those corners in. So all 4 corners should meet in the center. If it's not dead on perfect, it's not a big deal. It's totally okay. But you do want to burnish those edges so that you get a nice crisp fold there. And then what you want to do, and what I usually do when I say 4 to 6 boxes, is 4 to 6 lids and their matching bottoms, so that by the end I'll have complete boxes. So I do also, at this point, you don't really need any big tools like a scoreboard or anything. So it's pretty easy to kind of just sit in front of the TV and like do a handful of boxes at a time. So, the next thing you want to do, and this part, I should talk a little bit about paper weight, because here what we want to do is we want to fold each of the 4 edges into the center. I like to just roll it and give it a nice soft bend. That starts to kind of flex the paper a little bit, softens those paper fibers, and it doesn't commit you to like a hard crease or fold. But what you're aiming to do is you're aiming to bring the edge right to the middle of this. And you can see where the middle is, because that's where all the points, the tips of your corners, that's where they all meet. So you want to bring that edge to the center point. Make sure the top and bottom are nice and straight, nice and level with the rest. You don't want it to be crooked. And then burnish. This burnishing could be rather strenuous on your hands, just depending on how thick your cardstock is. So this particular piece I'm working with is, I think, probably around 80 pound, and that's about the thickest I would recommend, 80 pound cover weight. I think more ideally a 60 or 60 pound cover weight is better, because you don't need the structure of an 80 pound for one. So it might be less expensive to buy 65 pound weight paper. And second, this folding part is going to be a little bit easier on your hands as well. So I'm going to do the same for the lid. So, and this is exactly how I would approach this in terms of, the mass production of these boxes. I would do, make all of these folds for my boxes and my lids, again doing them in batches of maybe 4 or so. Here you can easily see, because the double-sided paper is a little bit more clear, but I'm bringing that edge right to the center, making sure the top and bottom are lined up, and when you have the one edge, it's easier to bring the other edge in to meet it. And it does help tremendously to kind of do that rolling so that it softens the paper, and then when you go to burnish with your bone folder, it's a little bit easier. I guess you could score it if you wanted, but I don't think you strictly need to, especially if you're doing what I'm doing, just kind of bending it, rolling it between your fingers a little bit to soften that. But because you are folding kind of multiple layers of paper here, that's why if you go with a thicker paper like 110 pound, it's going to be really tough to just make that fold by hand without scoring. And it's just going to be tougher, more strain and stress on your fingers. So the next part is you want to pull out 2 opposite facing corners. And what we want to do is make a couple of slits. So you basically want to, I just pull it out just so that I can see it. I identify which ones I'm working with. But when you make your cut, you do want to cut while it's folded. And you basically want to cut from that folded edge to the next score line that it runs into or intersects with. And you'll be able to tell when you hit that point because you're cutting through two pieces of paper, and then when you hit the end of that, you'll kind of feel when you're not cutting through two pieces of paper anymore. And so just take it slow. You cut right on the score line, and what you'll have is this sort of detached piece here, and then these pieces are going to be free to fold up also. So then you want to turn 180 degrees and do the exact same thing. If it's easier to see, you can fold out the other tabs too, and you just want to make that exact same cut. So along this score line here, basically we're cutting along the two sides, the side of the box there, and we are gonna release the sides of that so that it can fold in, and you'll see what I mean in a little bit. I'm gonna do the exact same thing with the lid. So obviously the lid and the bottom are gonna be constructed in the same way, but they are gonna be slightly different size because we started the all the folding and cutting with slightly larger panel for the lid, and ultimately that difference, that 1/4 of an inch difference, is what's going to make the lid slide onto the bottom really easily, but still be very a very kind of secure lid, so it doesn't just slip off when you hold it upside down, even if you have something in there. Okay, so pretty easy to assemble this. You just bring the two sides in, and that piece that we cut, just wrap it around, and then you're done. I mean, technically you're done. I like to secure these corners with a little bit of glue, makes the finish a little bit neater, and then it also makes it permanent, so you can't take this thing apart. And I do prefer the liquid adhesive because it's fast. And I basically draw a little square at the bottom and then a little X in the center. The reason why I do that is so that you have some adhesive all the way kind of at the edges of the triangles that get attached down in there. And of course, anytime with any kind of adhesive you use, give it a really good burnish because that's going to help it to be more secure. In the case of a liquid adhesive, it spreads out that liquid adhesive so you don't get any bumps or lumps. And what I do is I fold the two sides in, I fold this extra flap over, and then I take my bone folder and I really push into the corner there so that that paper sits as flush against that edge as possible. And I do burnish the top edge of the box also. So again, you want to bring the two sides in and then fold over that flap that we cut, and then burnish really well. I love this bone folder because it has that nice flat, sort of a wide edge too, so it's really great for pushing those that paper right into that corner. So do the same here. So draw a little square, squiggle along the diagonal, give a nice good burnish. The two sides I'm attaching down first are the two that we did not cut into, those two triangle flaps we didn't cut into. Bring the two sides up and inward. I'll bend two of them back so that you can see what I'm doing. So those go in, and then our flap folds over those two edges, and then just give it a good burnish and really push that into the corners, into the edge, and then burnish it into that adhesive. So really, really easy. And because this is such a reinforced box, you have multiple layers of paper. It's really nice, and it feels very substantial. And the graphic 45 paper is a really nice weight of cardstock as well. So it's perfect for making these, and you can see this fits in perfectly, and it's nice and secure. So that's the awesome thing about this, is that it does make for a really nice gift box. It measures, when it's complete, about 2 1/8. Technically it should be around 2 inches, but with all the extra bulk from folding, it's just a little bit more than that. But you have 2 1/8 square is the box, and then in terms of the depth, it's about 1 inch, 1 1/8 inch deep. So really perfect for just a little treat, a little gift for advent calendars. So a piece of chocolate will fit in there. I know Ferrero Rocher chocolates fit in really well, and maybe little charms or little keychains, things like that. So it's really, really ideal for small gifts. Okay, so now getting into our folio cover. So let me show you. Well, I'm gonna show you the way I'm not going to do with these little pieces here, just as an example. So let's say we have our front cover, we have our spine. These are just scrap pieces I'm using for demonstration, not the real ones. And then we have our back cover. One way to cover this, just like you would in a mini album, is to either use a single sheet of paper, or piece together 2 pieces of paper and cover them all at the same time and wrap them all as one. The thing is, when you do that, you do not want to butt up your spine and your cover pieces right against each other, because if you do, when you go to close that cover, the thickness of the chipboard doesn't have anywhere to go, because there's paper wrapped around the outside of it, and if it's butt up against another piece of chipboard, there's a lot of tension there, and to release that tension, it's going to crack or likely tear your paper. So if you want to do this method, you want to make sure you're leaving enough space in between your chipboard pieces, and people tend to recommend either 2 to 3 thicknesses of whatever chipboard you're using. That way, the depth of your chipboard has some space to bend into. I prefer, for both this and my mini albums, to actually wrap all of my chipboard pieces separately. I find that it results in an album that lays flat more easily, closes more easily, and just overall avoids the whole potential of having to estimate or leave that space between your chipboard. Because if you don't leave enough, you could still have that potential of your paper tearing. And if you leave too much, maybe it just doesn't look as good, or it feels a little floppy. So I feel like this is just, for me, easier and more ideal. Plus, I can usually find papers large enough to wrap my covers, where it can be a little bit difficult to find paper large enough to wrap your front, your spine, and your back cover all in one. Usually, and especially if you were to try to do that for this folio, you would definitely need to piece together multiple 12 by 12 sheets of paper in order to get the size that you need. Okay, so now the first thing I'm going to do is, I love to use wide rolls of tape like this. You could get double-sided adhesive in, if you had it in the 8.5 by 11 sheets, that would be perfect, because you would just need one of those sheets, because this cover piece is 8.5 by 11 exactly. But the reason why I like using this wider tape is just because it's a little bit less expensive when you work it out per square foot, but it's also faster to just cover the entirety of this piece of chipboard. And the reason why I want to cover the whole thing and not just maybe the outer edges, as I would normally be tempted to do, is because for my front cover especially, I want to make sure that this first layer of cardstock that is wrapping my chipboard is very, very securely stuck down to the chipboard, because, and this is going to be especially important if you do like to add a lot of embellishments and a lot of decorations to your cover. I generally don't like to. I like to keep it fairly flat so that it's easy for the recipient to store this if they need to store it. There's not a lot that they have to worry about accidentally crushing on the cover. But if you do like to put a lot of things on your covers, like hardware and stuff, especially if it's heavy, you want to make sure that this first layer is well stuck down to your chipboard, because it's sort of the foundation. So you don't want to have things start to lift at the foundation. And also, when you are working with double-sided adhesive, just be careful with how you handle your adhesive. So I've gotten into the habit of always trying to handle the adhesive from the sides so that I touch it as little as possible. Because as you know, the more you touch it, the more of that adhesive comes off and the less tacky it is. So you want your adhesive to be as strong as possible. It's not going to be possible to avoid touching it completely. You're going to have to touch it a little bit. But if you're mindful about it, just, try your best, basically. And I have this little strip here that I've saved from previous project and keep on having to move that down. But that's why these rolls are really nice, because you're basically only having to touch a little bit, and then you can line these covers really quickly. I only have a little bit left here, so I'm going to just use my smaller, thinner rolls here just to finish this off. But one thing, if I were making my if this were a mini album, I would probably be using Score Tape brand tape, because I know that's like a very trusted brand. I know it has a very strong adhesive, and like I said, for like your foundational layer of cardstock on your chipboard, you just want to make sure you're building everything onto a strong foundation. This being an advent calendar, it really only needs to last 24 days. So, because I have no expectations that the people I give advent calendars to will keep them year after year and use them, especially since I give them a new advent calendar every year. So I'm not too worried about this having to last for ages and ages. So that's the other thing is maybe gauge, because I know Score Tape can be expensive. So for things that you don't need to endure and stand the test of time, maybe invest in a slightly less expensive adhesive, and maybe they'll kind of feel like, because you don't want to be precious about your tapes, because double-sided adhesive over time can lose its stickiness. And so if you're going to buy it, you definitely want to use it. But if you're like me, sometimes you're a little bit precious about the things that are a little more expensive. But I do like to keep different adhesives on hand kind of for that reason, so that I can use what feels most appropriate for the project. Okay, so what's nice about having multiple different strips is that I can do this in stages. So I can leave most of the liner on this while I get this nice and positioned. And that way I'm not having to deal with an entirely sticky piece of chipboard. And all I'm aiming to do, it doesn't have to be perfect, but all I'm aiming to do is just kind of get this into the center here, so that I have enough enough paper around all four edges, and I've cut this piece so that it's 12 and a half essentially by 10 inches, and that gives me 3/4 of an inch along all four edges to wrap around. And I keep these liners. These liners are fantastic. If you want to like pre-make Nuvo drops, you can make them onto these liners and it'll come right off. They're great if you want to do like a inky background kind of technique. You can use it as a little bit of a palette. So I save these and I actually will use them for, a variety of different things. So I'm gonna again give this a really good burnish, and double-sided adhesive tape benefits from a really strong burnish as well as liquid adhesive because it's that pressure that you're adding that really kind of activates the adhesive and pushes all of the air out, because air is what's going to eventually dry out that adhesive. And there's always the potential that a double-sided dry adhesive will lose all of its tackiness due to just things like humidity. Like if you live in a environment that's a little bit more humid, it could have that effect on your dry adhesive. So the next thing I want to do is miter my corners, and as you saw, I left a little bit of distance away from the chipboard. You can just eyeball this. I did a fairly decent job of eyeballing, but the rule of thumb is about 2 thicknesses of your whatever your chipboard is. And the reason for that is if we cut these little angled slits, if we cut them right up against the chipboard, the corner, then you're not going to have enough paper to actually cover that corner. It's going to be exposed. So we want to avoid that. And as you may have noticed, I didn't score any lines through my pattern paper. And that's okay, because what I'm going to do is, and you can use this technique for any kind of cardstock, just using your bone folder, very gently just ease this flap. So as I run the bone folder against my chipboard, I start to increase the angle that I'm bending that paper over, and just take it in multiple passes, and that way you're just starting to kind of soften the paper fibers, and you're not just kind of wham, like folding it right over, because that's what can cause cracking. But by taking it in stages and just kind of slowly bending it, then you just soften those paper fibers. And that's basically what scoring does for you. It starts to stretch the paper fibers. It breaks those paper fibers so that when you do fold it, you don't get cracks. Okay, so here's why we miter those corners, so that when we fold these two in, you don't have a lot of overlapping paper. So let's say if I didn't do that, what would it look like? It would look a little bit like this. So you'd have, after your first fold, you'd have something like that, and then you would fold this over and you would have something like that. And there's all this extra paper here. And so that's why we want to make that miter cut, so that it doesn't have to be perfect. You might see a little bit of your chipboard on the inside. That's not the end of the world. But this way you basically have about, 1 layer of cardstock, so that when we cover this later with another panel, another matte layer, you don't have like a bulge in the corner, and you get a neater finish. So then to attach these flaps, I do like to use a combination of adhesive, and if you wanted, you could just use liquid adhesive by itself for this step. And I should note, the reason why I don't use liquid adhesive for that front panel is because I just don't want to, I want to make sure I don't have any adhesive lines, because you know how sometimes you squiggle on your liquid adhesive, even though I always burnish really well, I just don't want to risk having any of those, liquid adhesive lines come through. And with graphic 45 paper, it's thick, so you're not gonna have that problem anyways, but I just feel like this is more of a surefire way to avoid that. So then, getting back to attaching these folds or these flaps, I do like to run a bead of glue right against the chipboard. It helps to kind of soften that edge a little bit, so when you fold it over, there's a little bit of that liquid adhesive there, and it does help to keep everything secure, because ultimately your liquid adhesive, my preferred PVA glue is Lineco pH neutral. It's a bookbinding glue, and it's very affordable for one, and it's a bookbinding glue, so it's archival safe and all of that good stuff. For mini albums, that's really important. Any adhesive you use, you really want to make sure it's acid free and archival safe. But having just that little bit of liquid adhesive will make it a permanent bond, whereas double-sided adhesive, as I mentioned, just depending on different climates, it can over time, and maybe it's over a very, very long time, and that's acceptable, but there's always the potential that over time it can lose its stick. So you do want to make sure to kind of push your corners in, make sure that your paper does wrap around those corners, and then you just want to fold over each of these flaps. And the other reason why I like to use the combination of adhesives is because you do get a nice instant stick with double-sided adhesive, and then you have the permanency of the liquid adhesive. Not to mention it does, sort of soften this edge a little bit. And you might have noticed that I do also take my bone folder, just the flat edge of my bone folder, and then I rub it kind of along that chipboard. It gives you a really, really nice finish. So if you want to do that, you can do that as well. And you can see here that salvage edge folds in, so you don't really see it, but it will limit you, because when you go to mat this, and you want some of that pattern paper to still show, you do have that limit of how much pattern paper you can allow show beneath your mat. So there is that consideration to keep in mind, but then that does allow me to have enough paper to wrap this with a pretty pattern paper, as opposed to a piece of solid cardstock. You can buy, because for albums this large, I do use sometimes 11 by 17 in just white. There was a time when I was able to get that from Accent Opaque, but it seems out of stock, and I'm constantly looking for it. So 11 by 17 paper is also kind of handy to have, especially if you like to make large albums like this. Okay, so I'm gonna basically do the same thing for my front cover. I'll do the exact same thing, but for the spine, it's a little bit different. So I've chosen this bit of pattern paper here. Just works out really perfectly. These panel designs are the exact perfect width, but I'm gonna miter my corners differently here, and I'll show you why in a bit. These are going to be very shallow cuts. I'm still aiming for about that two thicknesses of chipboard away from the corner, and I'm just taking very shallow angles. So you can see here, most of the chipboard is still covered, and that's what I want. I just don't want paper kind of extending beyond the edges, but I want to cover as much of the cardstock or the chipboard as possible. And the reason for that is because when I go to attach my spine to my cover, I'm actually going to attach this piece of cardstock that's from my spine here that's not going to get folded down to cover my spine. It's actually going to get flipped over and attached to the back cover like that. So it'll look a little bit like that. So the reason why I like this and the reason why you don't have to worry about gaps and tearing is because the thickness of your chipboard, it's on the outside edge of that folded piece of cardstock. So there's no extra bulk or tension of the thickness of your cardstock. It's just paper getting folded onto itself. So that's why you don't have to worry about leaving, enough of a gap. You can actually butt these two up. And as well, it'll lay completely flat because we're attaching it completely flat as well. Okay, so basically what that means though is that this inside portion here, you want to make sure that it sort of covers your chipboard as much as possible, especially if you like to cut matte layers that are slightly smaller than the size of your cover, because you want to make sure that you're still covering the black chipboard as much as possible. And that's kind of why I like to use black, because if there's a little bit that isn't covered, it's not the end of the world because it's so dark. Whereas using like the craft color, kind of that cardboard color chipboard, might be, it just depends on the paper you're using, but it might be a little bit more noticeable. So what I'll do with the spine is I'm going to just glue down the top and the bottom to the chipboard. And then the two sides, I'm going to leave those free. So, but I'll do the exact same thing before. Double-sided right to the edge. That way I can get adhesive all the way to the edge and I don't have to worry about liquid adhesive kind of oozing off that edge. And I get that nice instant stick as well. And then I'll have the other two sides free for when I go to attach the spine to the two cover pieces. So at this point, that's all you need to do with your spine. And I did that same trick of kind of taking the flat end of my bone folder and just rubbing it along the chipboard. Gives it a really nice crisp finish there. Okay, so and in a moment you'll see I'll use some Tyvek as well, and Tyvek is a little bit more important for a mini album that you want to be very durable. But if you are making an advent calendar for maybe kiddos who might be overly zealous about like really getting into this, Tyvek will help strengthen things too. So it's made, I think originally it was made to kind of wrap houses and in-house construction, and it's a man-made material that is resistant to water, resistant to tearing. And it's that resistance to tearing that makes it really ideal for lining aspects of your album or folio in this case that might have a little bit more wear and tear to it. So any hinges, any flaps, things like that. So for my front cover, I did change things up a little. Instead of having a red background, I changed it to green. This is from the Patterns and Solids. And I'm going to take a moment to maybe cut out some of the strips from this lovely pattern just to beef up this portion of the pattern paper that I fussy cut. And I did fussy cut around the flowers so that I could, if I wanted, try to recreate the original pattern a little bit anyways. And that's sort of what I was going for, because in the original pattern there was a strip of red across the top that had a sentiment, and then along the bottom there was a really nice dark kind of a maroon red pattern as well. And so I was looking to maybe mimic some of that by pulling out some other pattern papers here. And I really liked this particular strip because it's got that snowy edge at the top too. And it actually reads, "It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas," which is great because, advent calendars, you pull them out at the beginning of December. So you get a little bit of that Christmas spirit right at the start of the month. And I am starting in on my advent calendars a little bit late because I actually like to try to ship them out by Thanksgiving so that they arrive wherever they need to arrive in time. So you can see here the front cover that I've fussy cut. It's wider. I left the full width, and I'll trim that down. But I found it to be helpful to at least just cut away the portion that I know for certain I'm not going to use, and just cut, keep as much as I think I might use, and then start to kind of play with the composition from there. So I've pulled out some other elements because I do have the 12 by 12 papers which come with the stickers, and as well I have the pack of ephemera too. And I forgot to mention at the very beginning, but this paper collection is actually currently in the clearance section. So the last time I checked, it's a few days ago now, but I saw that there was still stock available, and I think it was 25% off. Plus, Graphic 45 did add some new things to their clearance section as well. I think Midnight Tales is now on clearance, so definitely worth checking it out and seeing, because there's some great bargains that you can get there. So I am still without a plan, so I didn't want to just take up video time. So we're gonna set that aside, figure it out later off camera, and let me show you actually how to put your covers together. What's really convenient about having the little salvage strip is when you're flipped on this side, it then becomes really obvious which way is up, which is so incredibly useful because then, especially if you're using papers that have a correct orientation, it's a really nice visible way of telling that you've got the correct side showing. Okay, so we're looking at our spine, and these are the flaps, the extra papers that overhang. And I am so here I am using score tape. This is the spine. This is, holding our covers in place. So I definitely want to use the strongest adhesive I have, and I want to make sure this is reinforced as well as it can be, because while I don't expect this to be saved and pulled out year after year, if there are kids in the household who, are very eager to get into the advent calendar each morning, I do want it to be durable and at least last the month. So I've got this is just 1/4 inch double-sided score tape on a roll, and I'm going to peel back some of it so that I can get this mostly lined up because it's an 11-inch stretch, so it's a little bit easier for me to just take it in stages. And you can butt up your 2 chipboard pieces right up against each other. Don't worry about having to leave a gap at all. Just get everything lined up nice and straight, and I use my grid lines to help with that. And I did squiggle on a little bit of liquid adhesive in between my 2 strips of double-sided tape. And you can see since I only peeled back the liner for a couple inches or so, you can, once you get that tacked down on the one end, and it's where you want it, then you can peel back the rest, and it's then you don't have to worry, especially if you're going to use a strong adhesive like score tape. You don't have to worry about peeling it up and having it tear your papers. Okay, so then we're going to do the same thing on the other end. We're going to butt up our front cover against the chipboard of our spine, fold this tab over, and again, I line the two edges. The reason why I like to line the edges with the double-sided dry adhesive is because I can get that adhesive all the way to the edge, and that's to avoid any lifting or peeling at the edges. But the little squiggle of liquid adhesive is great through the center, because that's going to give it a nice permanent stick. But then I don't have to worry about liquid adhesive kind of oozing out from the sides, and it keeps everything a little bit more tidy, and it keeps my hands a little bit more clean. So now I am going to use a bit of Tyvek. So I buy Tyvek. You can buy them as envelopes because they are often used to ship things, since they are waterproof and tear-proof and all of that good stuff. So, or not waterproof, but resistant and tear-resistant. So they're great to just reinforce any aspect of your mini album. And the reason why I keep on bringing up mini albums is because this is exactly how I would make a mini album cover. Up to this point, everything is the same. And so the other form that you can buy this in is these 10-inch strips. These are actually wristbands. They come in different colors. They come in sheets that you can actually put through your printer and print, because they're wristbands meant for like events and things. So they've been designed so that you can put them through your printer and print your event details on them, for example. I have it in white and in black, because generally when I line my chipboard, it's usually either I wrap it in a white paper or a black paper to start. But black is nice if because it's nice and dark. So if there's any chance this is visible, which it won't be, in this case, it's pretty good. It fades into the back or into the shadows. And these wristbands are only 10 inches, so it doesn't cover the entire height of the book or the folio, but that's okay. It's reinforcing most of that hinge. And so as that hinge, open, as the covers open and close, you are not, you don't have to worry as much about potential tearing. Okay, so I've got this I think this is the other side of that pattern paper that I cut for the outside of my spine. So now I'm gonna just cut a portion of this off because it's the exact same width. And I'm going to use it on the inside. And this part of the spine will be seen because, so here's where we start to deviate a little bit from a mini album, because normally with your mini album, this is where I would be putting my hidden hinge. It would go right onto my spine there. But since we're not making a mini album, this is actually, this bit of the spine is actually going to be visible. And our boxes will be attached to our front and back covers. So I am cutting off a section that is roughly 3 3/4 wide by 10 3/4. So I'm leaving a little bit of the pattern paper showing at the top and bottom. And I want to give myself enough overhang left and right to cover our Tyvek, and to it just adds another layer of paper onto the hinge so that it is even more strong. Because right now, and that's the thing with just one layer of cardstock for the hinge, it might feel a little bit floppy. But by adding the Tyvek, we make it tear resistant for one. And then adding the second layer of cardstock, we actually make that cover feel less floppy, like it's not just going to kind of flop over. It feels just a little bit more secure. Even though with the Tyvek there, it's definitely plenty secure. It just may not feel that way because Tyvek is really thin. So I'll do the same thing here. So I'm going to use my score tape, nice strong tape, because this is part of our hinge. So just want to make sure that our covers really stay attached to our hinge here. And so I like to, again, put my dry adhesive all the way to the edges so that we don't get lifting along those edges. And I'm going to line the chipboard part of our spine as well, because again, just getting some tape all the way around all four edges, that way the paper here, design paper, is well secured on the hinge or on the spine, and we don't get any lifting there. And I will also squiggle on some liquid adhesive as well, again, for the permanency. And also the other thing, if you were to squiggle on a little bit of liquid adhesive, I tend to put it in the space where I don't have my double-sided adhesive. But if you were to squiggle on a little bit of liquid adhesive right over top of your double-sided adhesive, that's fine too, and that may also give you a little bit of kind of wiggle room if your adhesive touched down where you didn't mean for it to. And so it gives you a little bit of time to kind of lift that without tearing. And especially with something like score tape, which just like casual contact it's such a strong adhesive that even casual contact could tear your papers, and so you just want to kind of be careful of that. But that's where the liquid adhesive could also be helpful. But here you'll see on my spine here, I just like to just squiggle on some in the center. I know I'm gonna have adhesive all the way to the edge with that double-sided tape, and really the liquid adhesive is just for to make it nice and strong and permanent. But it's nice to use the combination of the two, because with the instant grab of the double-sided adhesive, I can just kind of continue on with my construction, and I don't have to worry about waiting for things to dry, because that double-sided adhesive is going to keep everything nice and secure while the liquid adhesive dries. So I can still kind of move on to the next step and not have to worry. So I'm just going to ease these folds a little bit just to break down those paper fibers. But look, that's basically our two covers attached to our spine. And on the inside, it's nice and pretty, except for we've got those two large black open areas. So I'm going to pick out a couple of pattern papers to cover those two, the front and the back inside covers, and then we'll be ready to stick down our boxes. So these sheets here, I'm gonna cut 1/4 of an inch smaller on the height and the width. So it's going to be 8 1/4 wide by 10 3/4 tall. And I've got it's nice to have both the patterns and solids along with the paper collection, the 12 by 12 paper collection, because then you just have a lot of choices to go with. And so I'm just doing a little bit of a preview here because all of my boxes are made, so I just want to make sure that they look good against whatever I'm going to choose. And most of my boxes have quite a bit of blue, especially the lighter blue, and so I thought that maybe having a paper with a little bit of that dark blue background would be nice. And because there's a little bit of red also with some of the boxes, I thought red could look good as a background. So really it's up to you, because at this point it's kind of just fun to play around with with the different papers. And I actually quite like having this nice assortment of different boxes or designs for the box, but you could certainly, um, make them out of a solid color cardstock if you wanted to kind of save your pretty papers. But I really love that it doesn't really matter too much whether something was directional or not, because I think once it's folded, the box really looks pretty cute, even despite any kind of orientation that the original design might have had. Because you could tell some of them had images of Santa, and when it was all folded and on the angle, it all looks a little bit tilted, but I think the box still looks pretty nice. So I'm gonna trim down my papers. This sheet here, I was originally thinking would be used for my front cover. And so it's already got a little bit trimmed off of it. But ultimately, I decided to go with the green paper instead. So I'm going to use this on the inside. And again, I'm going to trim it to 10 3/4 of an inch tall by 8 1/4 of an inch wide. So that will be our matte layer on the two cover pieces. And I'll do the same for this pattern too. It's kind of a nice like Harlequin diamond pattern. This was actually, that's the back side of the front cover that I fussy cut, which it was hard to cut into that, but I love this pattern. I think it's a nice mix of colors too, and it goes kind of well with our boxes too. And so to attach these down, I am going to basically do this how I would normally attach mats to like a mini album page. I'm going to put dry double-sided adhesive as close to the four edges as possible. And then I'm going to just squiggle some liquid adhesive in the center. And I'm not quite as worried about those kind of the liquid adhesive lines possibly showing through, which it's a very unlikely chance that it would, especially if you're doing as what I do, which is to always like burnish really well. But the reason why I'm even less worried about it on these inside covers is because our boxes are going to get attached to this. So really, really unlikely you'll see it because the boxes will cover it. But I do want the strength of this to really grab and hold, stay stuck onto our chipboard, because I'm going to be attaching 12 boxes on each of these covers. And so same logic applies with the front cover in the sense that you want to make sure your foundation is just well stuck so that you don't have any lifting or anything as you continue to glue additional elements on top of it. And so give it a really, really good burnish. Make sure that you can feel when you're running your bone folder across your panel. I can actually feel kind of that thickness of the liquid adhesive. So I just burnish until I can't feel that anymore. So then you know that you've really spread out all of that liquid adhesive and it's already kind of soaking its way into the papers. And that's what makes it a nice permanent stick, is that it is water soluble. So it does soak into your papers. If you are using non-graphic 45 papers that might be a little on the thin side, I would recommend using a solvent-based adhesive like Kalal all-purpose glue. And because it's solvent-based and not water-based, it actually won't soak into your papers. So you won't have any of that wrinkling that could happen with a craft glue or PVA glue. Line Coat pH Neutral is a really fantastic PVA glue because it's pretty low water content, and for that reason you don't get much risk at all of a of like warping of your paper or wrinkling of your paper. You don't you don't really get that with good quality papers for one, and a really good quality low water content PVA glue. But sometimes, your pattern papers that come a little bit thinner might be perfect for your project and you want to use them. So you want to find the right glues for that. And a solvent glue is fantastic because it's water, it's still liquid form, but it's going to be a really strong hold, but it's not going to actually soak into your papers. So now is the time to attach our boxes. So I just have these are just scrap pieces of the same chipboard. You can use anything that you want as a guide, but basically the width of these strips is about 1/2 inch. And when I went to attach this, 1/2 inch might be too narrow for the top margin. But basically, because I ended up with my boxes not being completely centered, there's a little bit more of the back cover showing on the bottom. But so keep that in mind. If you are a stickler for really centering things, you might want to go with closer to maybe 5/8 inch for that top piece. But basically, I'm using these strips of chipboard as spacers. So I've got 1/2 inch in between each box, and then 1/2 inch along the borders, the 4 borders of the cover. And I'm using a hot glue gun to attach my boxes. And mostly that's because the hot glue gun is going to be pretty strong stick, and it's going to set fast. So that way I can just keep moving my little spacer piece along, and if I can kind of butt that up almost like kind of aggressively if I needed to. You don't need to. It just needs to be sort of snug. But this way I don't have to worry about a box that I've already put down like moving as I'm attaching the rest. Because once this hot glue gun, the hot glue dries or cools, it's rather permanent, and so it's going to be like a very, very good stick. And I'm not going to show the entire process, but I'm going to do the same on both sides. And once you get a couple of rows or columns going, you can start to just eyeball the space between each of the boxes. And especially if you're using a pattern paper like this one that has that repeating pattern, you can use the pattern as your guide as well. So because I don't really think that it's too terribly important to be super precise. I just like to start with these spacers so that I can really make sure that I have enough space, or I've accommodated the spacing enough for the 12 boxes that needs to go onto each of these covers. So I'm putting 3 boxes going across and 4 boxes going down. And like I said, you can do a better job of spacing than I did, because I ended up with a little bit more space at the very bottom below my boxes. But I can try to make that look a little bit more intentional, because there are other pattern paper strips that I can add, and I can make it decorative. But I'm actually not too terribly bothered by that. But using these 1/2 inch strips is kind of a good way to get started. And whatever spacing you want to use, you can just cut down your extra little bits of chipboard and accordingly, and then use them as a guide to start to apply or attach your boxes. So here I'm not even using the little guide going up and down. I'm just using the horizontal one, and I'm just eyeballing the gap And because I've got a box above it and to the left of it, I have two boxes to kind of eyeball or gauge. So that's what I mean, like once you get a couple of these in, like one row and one column, then I think you've got enough there to really just eyeball things. But like I said, use what works for you, and whatever gap you want to leave yourself, if you want to space it a little bit better than what I've done, because I think there's actually a little bit extra room on the outside edge of the book as well. But here's all of the boxes in place, and some of the bottoms of my box were that kind of more sky blue color. Some of my box bottoms were red, and some are this kind of cream color. So the red boxes and the cream color ones I put against on the left side here, because that had the red pattern paper behind it, even though you don't see it really until you actually open the box. But you can use all one color. You can use pattern paper instead of just solid color cardstock too. I felt like most of the time it's going to get covered, so that's why I didn't want to use even my patterns and solids I didn't want to use for the bottoms of my box. But you could definitely do that if you want. There's enough paper between the 12 by 12 collection pack and the patterns and solids to definitely do your box bottoms out of pattern paper as well. And I like to just kind of sprinkle the different colored boxes around so that it's the color is a little bit kind of sporadic, because I've got some dark ones, some lighter ones, some with a little bit more white, some with some of the red as an accent. So I like to, especially with the pattern papers that have a little bit of red in them, kind of like to keep those a little bit spread apart. And so I did finally figure out what I wanted to do with my cover, and I ended up just chopping the bottom off. I did all of that fussy cutting, but in the end, I did not leave that. I just added another band of red sentiment, and I thought that worked great. And then for my numbers, I have a lot of alphabet dies, so I just found a set that had a nice size for the numbers where I could fit, two numbers comfortably on these boxes. And that finishes up my advent calendar, first one I'm making of the year. So if you wanted to add a ribbon closure to this, you could definitely do that. I would do that, obviously, before you put the pattern papers onto your chipboard. But I didn't feel like this needed it because the boxes are really secure. So if the boxes had a tendency for the lids to fall out or anything, I think the ribbon would be nice to kind of hold everything together. But these boxes are so secure that I don't think you have to worry about that at all. And so this is comes together fairly quickly. Really, making the boxes is the part that takes the longest. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. And if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to my channel and ringing the notification bell. Thanks so much. Until next time, happy crafting and have a fantastic day. Bye.